was the last person to shake hands with them and bid them adieu. Muirhead carefully went through the lighthouse and its ancillary buildings, looking for clues. Apart from the half-eaten meal and overturned chair in the kitchen, he could find nothing amiss. He checked the log. The last entry was dated the morning of the 15th of December and reported nothing out of the ordinary. But Muirhead was intrigued by the sight of one set of oilskins hanging in the entrance hall. Where were the other two? Had one of the men gone outdoors on a freezing December day, dressed only in light clothing? If so, why? Lighthouse regulations expressly forbade the three keepers to be outside at the same time. What had prompted them to break the rules? Muirhead could only speculate. He then checked the landing stage area, but because the seas were so heavy, could get no nearer than the crane platform, 70 feet above the crashing waves. Muirhead immediately noticed that the rocks and crevices below were strewn with uncoiled rope, usually stored in a large wooden box at the crane site. But the box was missing. The iron railings around the landing stage were bent and twisted out of shape. A large block of stone, weighing at least a ton, had been dislodged from the cliff face and had smashed down onto the landing stage. In his subsequent report to a board of inquiry held in Edinburgh in July 1901, Muirhead concluded that the three men had probably left the lighthouse to secure the wooden box when it was threatened with bad weather. As they were working, they were likely overwhelmed by a huge, unexpected wave and swept out to sea, never to be seen again. But not everyone was convinced by this explanation. There were just too many unanswered questions. Why had none of the bodies been swept back to shore, as usually happened in these waters? Why had three highly experienced men been apparently taken unawares by a freak wave? And why were two of them outside in oilskins, while the third was only lightly dressed? And the weather on the 15th of December, the day the men were thought to have disappeared, was calm. The storms did not start until the following day. As the years passed, the mystery only deepened. Some were convinced they could hear ghostly voices in the wind, mournfully calling out the names of the lost men. Albert Petrie, a normally pragmatic keeper from the mainland, expressed his own feelings.
The Flannan Isles rock station is just, once you're there, it's like any other rock station. But the thought of coming to the Flannan is pretty dreadful. It seems to have a bad sort of name throughout the service. Whenever anybody hears about going to the Flannan, it sort of sends a shock down their spine, sort of thing. But once you're here, as I say, it's just like any other rock station.
Petrie was asked what he thought had happened so many years earlier.
There's lots of funny, queer superstitions about the mystery. We've even heard it suggested that a foreign power, a boat from a foreign power had landed and took the keepers away. For what reason, I don't know. There couldn't be much of a spy out here, and it's even been suggested that a spaceship had picked them off.
Another keeper had a more logical explanation.
Can come up with all sorts of ideas of what could have happened. But I think one thing, sure nobody will come up with a definite answer now. But it looks to me as if they had gone down to try and secure something down at the landing. And one got carried away by the sea, and the rest sort of tried to save him, and they got carried away. But you hear all sorts of different opinions and different views of it, but I don't think anybody will ever come up with a definite answer now.
The story of the missing lighthouse keepers has continued to intrigue people over the years. In 1912, the poet Wilfred Wilson Gibson wrote Flannan Isle. In this long poem, a supernatural force overcomes the three men and turns them into seabirds. Gibson was inspired by Joseph Moore, the first man on the island following the disappearance, who'd allegedly seen three strange black birds watching him from a rock as he landed. The birds then took off into the air and dived noiselessly into the swirling sea. The mysterious fate of the three men even inspired an opera, The Lighthouse, which premiered at the Edinburgh Festival in 1980. Composed by Sir Peter Maxwell Davies, it has been performed hundreds of times since.
I remember, it must have been the late 70s, I was reading Craig Mair's book about the Scottish lighthouses, being interested in them, living in Orkney anyway. And in this book there was this tale of the Flannan Isles and this strange disappearance of the three keepers in 1900. And I remember thinking, well, that would make a good subject for an opera, perhaps.
As he walked the length and breadth of Eileen Moor, Sir Peter became immersed in the story.
I have a feeling on this island of tension, even just walking about, as if there's a whole army of ghosts around us. I read the accounts of the Court of Inquiry into the disappearance of the keepers. I took quite a lot of liberty, and my story became psychological, if you like. There were three keepers stranded in the lighthouse, beyond their term, getting on each other's nerves, and I contrasted their characters so that there was no way out of this at all.
Sir Peter didn't need to look far for musical inspiration. His raw material was what the men themselves would have heard: the piercing cries of seabirds, waves crashing against the cliff face, and the eerie sound of seals calling to each other in the night.
The opera does recreate the whole atmosphere of being on an island of this sort under those conditions in winter, where you're alone with the elements. Anything can happen.
Even 80 years after their disappearance, nothing could quell the rumours and speculation concerning the men's fate. It was suggested that one of the keepers was an alcoholic who, when drunk, pushed the others to their deaths and then drowned himself. There was no shortage of theories. One, that all three had fallen into the sea while fighting over a woman. Another, that they had been killed by a sea monster, which snatched them from the landing stage. Sir Peter had his own, much less fanciful explanation.
I suspect that, for whatever reason, they must have been swept away by a freak wave, and I know from my own experience these freak waves happen. What they were doing outside, why they went out, one doesn't know, but that is the most likely explanation.
Even though the Flannan Lighthouse continued to hold a particular dread for subsequent keepers, nothing unusual has occurred there since the disappearance of the three men in 1900. In September 1971, the light became fully automated. Now the bleak outpost is visited only occasionally, by helicopter or by maintenance vessels. As in lighthouses all over the world, computers have replaced the dedicated men who maintained the machinery, kept the wicks trimmed, and polished the huge revolving lenses. But their purpose remains the same: to warn seafarers of impending danger. Precisely what the 3 Flannan Lighthouse keepers were doing until they vanished so mysteriously in December 1900. Some have said that their ghosts later returned to Eileen Moor to join St. Flannan in his eternal watch over the lonely island.